Alrighty, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Grad School Coffee Hour. Before we get started, I would like to first thank everyone for coming out and being here with us, as well as a special thanks to the grad students and Professor Spark for spending their valuable time with us this evening. Just a couple brief housekeeping stuff. This Zoom meeting will be recorded and will be posted to the C9 and C10 YouTube channel. So if you do not feel comfortable being recorded, please feel free to turn your camera off. We would love if you guys could turn your cameras on, but we also understand that some of you might not be in a circumstance that you can do that. So either way is totally fine. We also have closed captioning turned on for accessibility's sake. And now let's just get started with some brief introductions from the organizers and the staff. I'll go first, and what we're asking for is name, pronouns, year, and major. So my name's Nicole. My pronouns are she, they, he. I am a second-year linguistics in legal studies major, and I will pass it off to Nicholas.
Yeah, hi, my name is Nicholas Mendez. I am a second-year cognitive science major, and my pronouns are he, him, his, and I'll pass it off to Leilani.
Hi everyone, I'm Leilani. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a fourth-year intensive psych major. And I'll pass it to Saloni.
Hello, I'm Saloni. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm a fourth-year politics and legal studies double major, and I'll pass it to Kate if you are there.
Yeah, hi, I'm Kate. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a second-year politics and environmental studies double major.
Right, and with that, we conclude our introductions for all the organizers. Now we'll go with the introductions of the wonderful panelists, starting with Professor Spark. And besides the general pronouns and department and year, we would also like to just hear a brief statement about your academic history or research interests.
All right, so I'm Professor Spark, Matt Spark. Frozen. Nope, no, I'm back. I use he, him, his pronouns. And I guess the most interesting aspect of my background to bring to this conversation tonight is my journey from undergrad, which was in the UK, obviously. I went to the University of Oxford, and I was hoping to stay on there to do grad school with a wonderful professor called David Harvey. And when I went to see him, he said, no, you got to get out. You got to get the hell out of Oxford. It's a dying institution. And then he suggested these other places that I look at, and they were all overseas. And I kind of quickly got the picture that he saw me as a bit of a provincial kid from Southeast England who really needed to see the world to grow up a bit more. And so I did apply to UBC in Canada and UCLA in Los Angeles. And I got a really nice package from UBC, which is where I ended up going. I did a geography PhD, got a job at UW for 20 years as a professor. And then 3 years ago, I came to UCSC. So now I should pass the baton on to one of the other folk, Adrian or Alberto or Christian.
I think that will be me. Hi, everyone. My name is Alberto. He, his, him pronouns. I am actually a third year in the politics department, so I had the luck to have class with Professor Spark before. My undergraduate experience, I did 2 years community college in San Diego, studying psychology. Then I transferred to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and did communications. Then I did my first master's in media in the Netherlands, Erasmus University Rotterdam. And then I came back to California for my PhD in politics. So I've been kind of all over the social sciences.
I think I'm next here. Hey everyone, my name is Christian Alvarado. I am a fourth year in the History of Consciousness department with a designated emphasis in critical race and ethnic studies. I did my undergraduate work at the University of Nevada in Reno in economics. I I think the sort of marked difference between that and my later academic trajectory was that I was much more interested in the college experience during that period of 4 years than I was in sort of academics. But after I wrapped up there, I had, and I'll talk more about this, I'm sure, in some tangential ways later. I decided that the sort of world of business and econ wasn't for me, and ended up moving to San Diego to do my master's in history. Worked as a carpenter to establish my residency in California, and then all through when I was doing my master's part-time. And then after that came to UCSC and history of consciousness. Yeah, so I'll leave it there for now.
Annika, would you mind going next?
Oh yeah, okay. I'm Annika, I use she, her pronouns. I'm a third year, but I'm graduating a year early, so fourth year, I guess. I am in the intensive psychology field as well as the education major. I go to UCSC, if that wasn't clear. And I have applied for grad school and I got into programs, so I'm currently deciding where I want to go, but I think I'm leaning towards USF for the PsyD program. And yeah, I'm happy to be here. And I think Adrian's next.
My name is Adrian Ricker, she, her, hers. I'm a PhD candidate in the Earth Science Department, and I also have a designated emphasis in ecology and evolutionary biology. So it's kind of like a double major for grad studies. I am originally from rural North Dakota, but I got my Bachelor's of Science degree from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, where I majored in biological sciences and geology. And I actually went straight from bachelor's to PhD. So I skipped the master's step and applied to a number of programs and can give that kind of perspective. I'm also very happy to be here today.
Alrighty, I think that concludes the introductions. Thank you guys so much. Now we will be transitioning into the main questioning period. So first I have an icebreaker. This was personally my favorite question out of all of those that were entered, but it goes, as we are currently living through rapid technological progress, is it worth it going to grad school? Why or why not? I see other folks making huge money by making YouTube videos.
And so you want us to address that briefly in a sort of a round robin kind of style?
Yep, that's how this portion
Okay.
goes.
All right, so yeah, well, I in a way I think that the money question is both like around this, so like you could do other things and make so much more money. It's both totally the wrong question and yet it's actually a really important question to be asking when you do look at graduate schools. I mean, it's the wrong question in that you're never going to get rich from going to graduate school. And if that's your kind of goal in life, it's really just totally the wrong thing to be thinking about in the first place. Even the most well-paid professors, you know, they're not like millionaires. And anyway, it's just not very likely. But that said, it does lead for people who go through graduate school to many future good paying jobs and so forth, and a really rewarding life and a set of good life options. So don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining, you know, like grad school opens up wonderful doors and it's very liberating. The money question that nevertheless you have to keep asking is, how can I get through graduate school given the cost of living? And as our fellow grads here will tell you, and as our COLA struggle underlined here at UCSC, you know, it's really difficult to get through graduate school, even if you have funding through TA-ships, even if you have some fellowships, and especially if you go to graduate school in a place like California or most of the places on the East Coast, where the costs of living are very high. So you do have to, unfortunately, ask these money questions at that level. Even if you're fascinated with the life of the mind and want to be liberated in that sort of way by the life of the mind, I still think that's the dream that should drive you, the intellectual passion, the love of the ideas, the love of that's what should drive you to go to grad school. But you do have to think about how you put bread on the table and make ends meet while you go through the process.
Are we following the same order? Should I go? All right. Well, yes, I second what Dr. Spar said. If you want to get rich, I don't know if grad school is necessarily the most direct way to get there. But also the classic answer is depends, right? Depends on grad school. Like MBAs, but you could consider them as grad school, and those are specific paths, right? Steps to get specific positions, right? You can get, I also, when I talk about grad school, I also refer to grad school in Europe. So you can get 1 year master's that kind of prepares you for a specific career that allows you to enter a different entry level in a company, for example. Or if you take the grad school of a PhD, you're likely, right, to get the academic way, or if you're in STEM, I'm sure Adrian can tell more about it, opens also for industry jobs. So generally speaking, like it depends on what you're going for grad school for, right? So it will depending on your interest and your general career goals.
Yeah, I just want to sort of echo everything that's already been said, and I was also really intrigued by this whole question. But the second part is interesting too, mentioning YouTube videos or something like that. I think one of the things that this question's sort of getting at is ways to make a living in different capacities as an intellectual. It's certainly the case that, particularly sitting in the humanities, which feels this, I think in a certainly a very acute way, that yes, going to grad school in the humanities is not going to make one a lot of money, basically, regardless of how the dice shake out. What it does do is give you institutional backing to do something and pursue a set of interests that you really love and are committed to for a period of time. In theory, there are all sorts of career options that open up. The professoriate is one of them, but particularly in the humanities, folks are thinking, which has often been siloed and constricted in terms of the career paths that echo out of that. There's been a more concerted move to think about what happens after, right? But and different trajectories that folks might take. But I don't think, I think that there are multiple different ways to make your way in this world doing intellectual things. YouTube's definitely one of them, at least in the humanities. I think that there's a case to be made for that. But grad school gives you a certain version of that. It gives you a relatively concentrated and institutionalized sort of version of that one might not get by just sort of freewheeling it. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah, I think grad school is an investment. Definitely remember your intent and your why. I've been told by many grad school students that it's important to remember the purpose and the why, because grad school will make you want to pull your hair out at times. And if it doesn't, then you're not doing it right. But it's an investment in your future. And if you remember why you're wanting to do it, and why you're wanting to go to a 6 to 8 year program, maybe 2-year program, you're going to do fine, and you're going to make it in life if you have that determination, and you have that purpose, that drive in you. And for psychology, I mean, mental health care professionals are always in need, especially right now. So I know I'm going to find a job after I graduate. I know I'm going to be in need out there in the world. And I just have to remember that there is a reason why I'm doing this. I have that drive. And yeah, the debt will be worth it in the end, hopefully. So that's what my thinking is right now.
Yeah, so I want to touch on the other part of that question of rapid technological progress is happening right now. And the truth of the matter is that a lot of that is happening at universities, and a lot of that is happening in graduate studies. You know, graduate students are helping to push the envelope of human knowledge. And I think that that's like a very like empowering thing. So if you want to be part of that in pushing how much we know and the progress of technology, like graduate school would be one of the places to be for that. And you know, like Christian said, grad school does open doors, and I think that's, you know, particularly true in STEM. You can get many STEM jobs without a graduate degree, but graduate degrees certainly help. You know, like that infamous, you know, 1 to 5 years experience or whatever. Your grad programs can count towards that experience that they expect in job applications. So that's just another way that going to a graduate program can increase your like job opportunities afterwards. It's not all just get a PhD, become a professor. There's many different opportunities there.
Yeah, it was great to hear from all of you and your sort of thoughts on the worth of grad school in this modern day. So thank you all for that. For now, though, we're going to transition into our sort of more formal questions that we have planned for you guys. And so first with you, Professor Spark, starting off, our first question is, we have quite a few first-gen students with us tonight. And so as you might have guessed, one of our most popular questions was how to start looking at the process of getting into grad school.
Great. Yeah. Well, as some of you may know, I was a first-gen student as an undergrad, and then, of course, as a grad as well. And so you're doing the right thing, which is asking people questions, organizing this event and talking to as many different people as possible is a great way in. And those of you who do come from first-gen families or poorer families or families that are don't have tons of cultural capital, you know, like don't take no for an answer. Like if you feel like you're interested, you know, like you should apply. You should pursue your dreams. And just because your family hasn't ever had that experience before, it shouldn't be a barrier. In fact, I would say right now, finally, academic programs across the United States have all got the memo. You know, I think the tragedies of last year brought to the fore the structural racism in the United States that's still so persistent and widespread that has to be overcome. And I think many more academics across all different fields, much more than I've ever seen before, feel like they've got to play a role in opening up doorways to people. So this is a good time to apply if you're seriously interested in graduate school, and starting the process, asking these questions about how to go about it is good. Where to start beyond that? I think you really have to make it clear to, you know, building on what Annika said, you know, you really have to sort of know where you feel like you want to make a contribution. Like if you want to go in a more professional school direction, there's much more clear steps you have to go through to get into a medical school or into an MBA program or a master's in public health program. Any of those schools have a very kind of clear ladder of things and qualifications that are needed to get into them. Meanwhile, what I don't think a lot of undergrads always appreciate is that academic programs like in the social sciences or the humanities or natural sciences, like where Adrian is, that those kinds of programs have a completely different funding structure. And although as it's limited, most of them fund you as you go through graduate school. All right. And so although you kind of see those big price tags associated with professional degree programs like medical school at $65,000 to $75,000 a year, that's not the same for a graduate school in the humanities or social sciences or natural sciences. And you don't have to go deep into debt. And you should be able to compare offers from different places where they offer you, 3, 4, 5 years of funding. We're now committed to offering 5-year funding packages to all applicants to UCSC. Most of those packages in the social sciences are funding through TA-ships. So I think I'll leave it there for this particular round of, but it's important to know those different pathways, because then you can start to think about the nuts and bolts of the application process in a different way, and think about how it relates to your finances in a different way.
Well, I think Professor Spark was pretty thorough. I would just add, yes, to use the resources that your undergraduate institution offers, and to use the internet. I did a lot of that even when I was in Italy. Like, spent hours and hours just like Googling universities and like using keyword search of things that would have been interesting for me. And I'm not necessarily a great supporter of these ranking systems, because that's a whole other issue, but those kind of systems can actually help you, like top 5 masters in fill the blank, right? Or how to get a master's in fill the blank. There are some resources there that you can at least get you started, right? But yeah, I think whatever Professor Sparks said, I completely agree.
Yeah, I do not come from a family with much formal education. My parents didn't go to college, and so I also felt very sort of lost when I started this process. I think from the standpoint of the humanities, in addition just to everything that's already been said, which I think is exactly on point, the humanities in particular, there's tends to be sort of specialization and ways that different sort of programs that you'll look at will be greater or lesser fits with you, just from the standpoint of what they really sort of premise their sort of core sets of values on and things like that. One of the things I did a lot when I applied to PhDs, and did not do at all when I applied to my master's program, which was mainly, I was thinking of just going or becoming a high school teacher at that time, was really sort of thoroughly research the institutions that I was applying to, and particularly when it came time to decide. So know your departments that you're applying to, I think would be something that I would definitely advocate for.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all of this. Personally, I don't think UCSC supports students in the grad school application process. I think you have to voice your own opinions and you have to go seek help on your own. At least that's what I did. I talked to my professors, I talked to my TAs who had gone through the process. And that's where I really started to begin the journey of grad school applications, because it is a long journey and it can be very scary and confusing. I think having a support system is invaluable, but it's not impossible to do it alone as well. I think that reaching out to TAs helped me because they recommended schools I could apply to. I also bought a huge book from Princeton Review with all of these different psychology grad schools that I could apply to. And I looked through the book and I was like, none of these sound interesting to me. So I went online and I researched online. And I went through the rankings. I did use the ranking system. And taking the GRE is part of the process for at least the grad school that I wanted to go to. It was online. And so taking tests is part of the process as well. Collecting those letters of recommendation, making sure you have strong connections with the people that are writing your letters of recommendation. I also really suggest, if you want to go to grad school, go attend a class of a school that you might be interested in. That really helped me learn what classes look like, what the vibe is. And that also can connect you to professors at the school that you're applying to, and they can be a system of support. they are open to talking to you, hopefully. And if they're not, maybe that's a reflection of the school. But I think it can be scary, but there are people out there to support you. You have professors, you have TAs, you have the Career Center, you have advisors. And I think it's an incredible journey. It's long, but it's also worth it in the end. Writing that personal statement can be grueling and take a lot of self-reflection. But yeah, I think it's important to be honest with yourself and say, if you really want to do it and go for it and put in that effort.
Yeah, I resonate with a lot of what has already been said. And just to touch on like maybe some of the nuanced differences with STEM programs, not with all STEM programs, but with a lot of them, you'll be working with a particular advisor for your grad program. And so it sometimes is less about, you know, the school or even the department and more about that individual person, because, you know, you're essentially signing up for a, you know, 5 to 8 year relationship with another person that you're going to be working with a lot. So I think that, like, with that in mind, there's a few things that are really important when it comes to preparing for your graduate applications. It's like you want to show that you're someone who can stick it out, because these advisors don't want to invest a lot into a new student for them to not have the perseverance to be successful in graduate school. So that's pretty important. Showing that you are interested in research, and if you still have time in your undergraduate, getting involved in research here at Santa Cruz. It can seem kind of intimidating, but really all it takes is emailing a professor and asking if you can talk to them during their office hours. Like, that's how I got involved in research as an undergrad. I just showed up to their office hours and I was like, I want to work in your lab. And they're just like, oh, okay, sure. You know, I worked in 3 different professors' labs before I found, you know, the field that I wanted to be in. So don't be intimidated by that. You know, like, professors want to feel like people are interested in their work, you know? So like, come to them and say, like, I think what you're doing is really cool and I want to learn more about it. Can I work in your lab, or can I join your lab group meetings? You know, you can get pretty far with just that. And part of that as well is getting to know the professors of the classes that you're taking, because you are going to need letters of recommendation, and having a support group is going to be really important. And the professors are part of that, because they can help you identify programs that fit your wants. You know, I found Santa Cruz because it was recommended to me by my undergrad research advisor. This is my cat joining me now. You'll see her again. And then Annika mentioned the GRE. That reminds me that, you know, when you are actually preparing for the application process itself, you really have to be very detailed about it, because some schools need the GRE and some of them now don't. You know, UCSC itself is moving away from the GRE in the next couple of years. So, you know, that's something to keep in mind. And if a program needs the GRE, does it also need a subject test? Does it need, you know, this essay or that essay? Do they need a CV? Do they need a resume? There's going to be a lot of really nuanced differences in each of your applications. And for your best bet of success, you have to pay attention to each of those details and not just give the same essay to all of the programs. So I guess, like, short answer, the earlier you can start the process, the better.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for that. So I'm going to combine these next 2 questions because I think a lot of information has already been given on one of them. So the first question is, what does the application process look like? So I know many of you discussed that already. And so the second question will then be, how did you end up choosing the program that you are currently going to be in, or in the case of Crystal Spark, went through?
Should we change up the order, guys, so it's a bit more mixed? Does someone else want to go first instead of me? I'm happy to answer it, but
I can go.
Yeah, that'll be great.
Okay. The application process really is up to the individual. You can start as early as first year if you really want to, but you can start your fourth year as well. It begins by having conversations and making connections, trying to figure out which program you want to apply to or programs. It then looks like maybe taking a test to get in, or writing those personal statements, collecting that resume material, getting those letters of recommendation, and just making sure you fill out the actual application out correctly. It's all online for most schools. And they ask you to send transcripts. They ask you to pay for the application. Some schools offer like free application codes, so I didn't have to pay for some applications, which was really nice. I chose to apply to schools that were mainly in Northern California. One school was in Southern California. I applied to 10 schools in total. I started with a list of 20 and then I narrowed it down to 10. I chose to stay in Northern California because I want to practice here. I know what my goals are. I've known since I was 12 years old that I want to have a practice. I want to work with kids, specifically in the trauma field. I want to teach eventually at a university, and I also want to do community work. So I want to do a lot of different things, and a PsyD allows me to do that. I also applied to MFT programs, which is a master's in family therapy. It is a shorter program. They're usually 2 to 3 years, whereas a PsyD is 5 to 7 years. And I applied to MFT programs because I thought I might not get into a PsyD program, honestly. I didn't think I was a competitive applicant coming right out of undergrad. I'm young. I don't have a whole lot of experiences compared to, say, 50-year-olds who are applying for the same programs. But once I was doing the interviews and I got into programs, I was like, wow, I'm actually competitive and I'm actually doing this. So it was exciting. And yeah, I think looking at what your goals are in the future, what you want to be, at least if you can try and do that, and then going to a school that resonates with you, not only with their mission, but also will get you to those goals, will allow you to pass those licensing exams if that's necessary. And yeah, I think I'm choosing to go to USF because it has an undergrad program, so people know the name. I got in, that's a huge one. And I really have connected with the community there. I didn't connect with them during the interview, I have to say, but after I got the acceptance and I started connecting with people, I really love the community aspect. It's a new program. It was created in 2013, but they have an incredible community and that they're really aiming for social justice. And that's a huge draw for me for schools. Also a huge thing for the programs I applied to, they had to be APA accredited. So that was a huge thing. They had to have everything that I needed to have. For example, I didn't choose a school called Alliant International University because they're a for-profit university. So they're owned by a company. And that isn't appealing to me because it maybe shows that they're in it for the money. And PsyD programs don't get a lot of funding like PhD programs. So there is more debt that has to be taken on, but it's a different kind of program and it's focused in clinical practice and research. Yeah, that's my little bit.
Would anyone like to go next?
I can say a little bit. Just in terms of the application process, and I know I keep like prefacing a lot of things by saying maybe this just applies to the humanities. I'm not sure if it does, but one of the things that most departments in the humanities will ask you for is a writing sample. And And the reason that I bring this up is that as you sort of start moving toward the end of your undergrad experience, this is not something that I did and I regretted it the entire time that I was applying. It may behoove you to maybe think about which of your sort of term papers that you're producing or whatever it is you're doing in your sort of advanced undergrad work could serve as that, or as something that you continually sort of refine, because history of consciousness is unique in the sense that the grads get to participate on admissions. So I've actually been on the admissions committee for HisCon a couple times. And maybe this is particularly the department, but the first thing, or the first two things that are visited are the research statement, so what you want to do basically if you were to come here, and the writing sample to see if you've sort of successfully pulled off some sort of project in the past. That's not necessarily going to be applicable to every humanities department that you'll come across, but it's I think a pretty good sense of what happens when departments in the humanities do look at applications. The other question was, choosing where to apply in which program, right? So when I was applying for PhD programs, I primarily, history of consciousness was the only disciplinarily history program that I applied to. What it really came down to me was a choice between doing the PhD at the University of Cape Town in South Africa or coming here. I ended up deciding to come here, because I fell in love with the department that I really didn't understand it when I applied to it. I was like, oh, like the history department at UCSC doesn't really seem like a place that's going to support my project, but this history of consciousness thing does. And a lot of people in my department sort of come to it knowing a lot about it, and I sort of stumbled into it in certain ways. But at the end of the day, part of it was just the fact of wanting to stay somewhat anchored into family here, being able to support my parents and see them when I can. So that was a big part of why I made the decision to come here. But more generally, I think that when I reflect on my decision to come to HisCon, what it was really for me was that I always sort of felt like something of an outlier in my history MA program, in the sense that I was often sort of being reined in for being kind of a little too interdisciplinary and kooky and theoretically oriented and what have you. And HisCon, and part of the reason I'm bringing this up is the importance, I think, of knowing where you're applying and getting to know places. HisCon really offered me a place where I could sort of let that component of me sort of flourish in a way that it wouldn't have in conventional history departments. So that's I think where I'll leave it.
Yeah, Alberto or Adrian or Professor Spark, do you guys want to go next?
I can go next, that's fine. Okay, so the first part of the application process, in the earth sciences, most applications are due in December or kind of early January. So yeah, I'm thinking back to my senior year where I was in the midst of finishing up my thesis and trying to graduate while also doing all of these applications, and oh boy, it was just a lot. I applied to 12 schools. 10 of them were PhD programs and 2 of them were master's programs. I got interviews at 4 of the PhD programs, and my ultimate choice came down to 2 of them. And I guess I kind of chose this program because one, I got a fellowship here, so I had a little bit more freedom in the research that I was going to do, instead of like was mentioned earlier, is a lot of the time research, or graduate schools in STEM are funded, the student doesn't pay for them, but sometimes that is constrained by the research grants that the professor has gotten. And so my other choice, I would have been constrained to work on the project that I was going to be supported by, which when it came down to it, I wasn't as interested in. So coming here where I had a fellowship and I would have more freedom to choose the things that I studied was really enticing to me, as well as I am extremely involved in student leadership extracurricular activities. And, my advisor here was very supportive of that and thought that it could be really beneficial to my, eventual career, versus some of the other programs that I looked at. They really wanted you to just like narrow in and focus mostly on research and not really do much else. So those were, some of the things that were really important to me in making my decision. But I guess the overall application process, like Annika mentioned, it started much earlier where, I was networking with people. I was emailing potential advisors, asking them to talk on Skype. That was before Zoom. And, trying to meet them at research conferences if I could, building relationships with the professors that I had at my university so that I could get letters of recommendation. So it really, I think, was overall like a 3-year process to get all of that stuff going. But I'm really happy where it ended up.
Okay, I can keep it brief since I second a lot of the comments that have been made. More like a suggestion. Personally, the way I approach this, I kind of created almost like a table with priorities and almost create like a ranking system. Location for me is crucial. Network, as Adrian, Christian, Annika all have mentioned, like how is the program oriented, who's there, what kind of professors I'm going to end up working with. So it's a lot to think about, but you'll be happy you cannot create a priority, because maybe some people, as we saw in the previous question, want to make money. So maybe you just select the program that gives you the most money, right? Some other is location, some other is networking, right? So I would really push you, I would suggest you to kind of like create a sort of ranking of what is important for you. So then once you start getting those replies from different programs, or even when you apply to programs, you kind of like have an easier time in making your decision.
I just agree with everything the folks who've spoken already have said. I think those are all really good bits of advice. I guess I think of that chart that Alberto was just talking about as a kind of Venn diagram, really, where the things, you kind of like the sweet spots in the middle where the main issues that you're concerned with all come together. And I wouldn't want to downplay any of the intersecting factors. I mean, those connections with the intellectual work or the professional work, in, like as Annika was saying, of the schools that you're applying to really matters. I think the more sort of authentically close it is to your own passions as an undergraduate student, the better. If there's been an article that you've read or a book that you've read during your undergraduate time that's really appealed to you, that was written by a real person and they might not be dead yet. And so, you can try and reach out to them and make a connection that way. And back in the day when I was doing it, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have the email even. I just wrote letters to people that had written articles that really appealed to me. So building that up as a sort of authentic connection, not a strategic one. I hate getting overture letters written by people that are clearly just trying to sort of butter me up to get in a good position for the grad application. And you can sort of tell it a mile away, especially when the letter ends, and I would love to spend my time in graduate school at UCLA. And you think, really? Why didn't you tailor the letter a little bit more for UCSC? So you don't want to make that kind of mistake. You want to build the relationship on an authentic basis. But that doesn't mean being blind, as I said at the outset, to the kind of practical issues of money. So like Alberto was saying, and Adrian too, like, you think about the offers competitively, like Adrian did, like apply to lots of different places, you have more chance of getting a good offer. I would say in this sort of time where the West Coast has become so ridiculously expensive, and it's not just California. I mean, Seattle is out of sight. Vancouver, Washington, in British Columbia is really, really expensive. All the faculty can't afford to live within like less than an hour's commute from their campus. And they're all getting like this. I don't know where these places are going to be able to recruit faculty from in the future, because no one can afford to move into the vicinity of the university. But anyway, from a grad student point of view, you can think about the place in that way too. Like some of the East Coast schools are in cheaper places to live, like Providence, Rhode Island, for example, where Brown is. It's an Ivy League school in a place that's cheap to live. That's a winning scenario. And some of the places in the middle of the country are much cheaper to live. University of Wisconsin, for example, you can live there so cheaply. So great research one university, so-called R1 University, gets tons of federal funding for the natural sciences, really good social sciences, really good humanities. And it's somewhere where, you look up the rents on Zillow, they're so cheap, you think, is that it would be like a week in Santa Cruz versus a month in one of these places. So those are sort of practical things that are, I think, now worth thinking about. Overseas, like Canada, Christian looked at South Africa, a really interesting option. Australia, UK, they all offer interesting options. It's harder as an international student to secure some of the funding that's targeted for domestic support, but most of the natural sciences have this kind of research grant-driven funding opportunity. And the Canadian universities still have a lot of funding for social sciences and humanities, so they're worth looking at seriously. And they're big schools too. They're really big schools with big programs. So I would look very seriously at Canada, unless you're afraid of frostbite or something. And yeah, what else to mention? I think I've made the most important points. The thing I regretted not saying in my first round comments, I'll just end with that, which is like, as well as talking to grad students here, as well as talking to other students here, talk to faculty, professors really do want to help you with this, and not just me. Most of my colleagues are so eager to help students think about grad school, and just don't feel like embarrassed about it. Most of them won't do what David Harvey did to me and tell you to get to go to the other side of the world. He can actually, they'll probably tell you about other places in California. So just talk to the professors here.
All right, thank you for that. We're going to move on to the next
Adrian,
question.
sorry, Adrian had her hand raised.
Oh.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something really quick based off of the comment of international programs. In STEM, there are very large differences between getting a PhD in the US versus getting a PhD, in Europe. I have a friend that I graduated from Nebraska with, and I'm getting a PhD here, and she's getting a PhD in England. And their program is very, very specific. Her PhD is only 3 years. She doesn't take any classes. It's entirely focused on research, and there's not TAing either, not too much TAing. So, time-wise, that could be something that plays a part in it. If you are ready to jump headfirst into a very serious project and you want to get it done fairly quickly, Europe could be a really good way to do that. When it comes to, getting maybe a teaching job, because you don't get as much teaching experience in those kinds of programs, maybe it doesn't make so much sense. So there's a lot of nuances, and I think that Professor Spark is entirely right that you should be talking to professors here about these things because they can help you with these nuances and differences and really help guide you to the path that's going to be best for your interests.
All right, thank you. So our next question is, how much of a barrier is money? Because we touched a little bit on this. How can you finance grad school? What financial aid opportunities are available? How do you handle the costs of grad school and student loans from undergrad? How do you fund your way through grad school? So basically all of the financial aspects and barriers of grad school.
I'll have a quick stab at this, and then I'm going to have to leave this conversation. I'm sorry, but I've spoken quite a bit about the money side of things already. The one thing I haven't mentioned that I think is worth noting is that there are also, in addition to all the considerations of the packages particular schools put together to recruit you once they've made an offer, that tend to mix TA offer funding, TA-based funding with fellowships. If you're lucky, fellowships are, as Adrian said, they're kind of golden. The one other thing to bear in mind is that there are these very prestigious competitions you can apply for, and the earlier you apply for them, the better. The most famous ones are like Rhodes, the Rhodes Scholarship to go to Oxford. There's the German Marshall Fund to go to Cambridge. There's the Gates Foundation Fund to go to Cambridge. So if you can stomach the idea of going to the UK, those are really great awards. And I wouldn't be surprised if they rename the Rhodes Award fairly soon because of his close association with British imperialism and the huge political campaign from South Africa to the UK that Rhodes must fall. So that award might end up having a new name at some point, but it's an incredible award to get, and it's very nice. And there are some others that I think the Rotary Foundation, for example, has a program aimed at American students to take them to Europe. There's some fellowships to go to Asia too. So those are good things to look out for, but they're very sort of specific as to where they take you. So I'm going to be taken now to dinner. So I'm going to say good night to you all, and also offer my own office hours. You know, if anyone wants to follow up with me, I'm more than happy to talk to you either on Zoom or also when we're back on campus in my office up in Crown. But thanks for all the organizing and great to see you all. Bye.
Thank you so much, Professor Spark. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One other comment on this question. So, or I guess I have several, but one thing that I want to point out is that, and I think is really important to bear in mind, is that anything that's federally subsidized in terms of a student loan is deferred while you're in graduate school. I think that that's the case across the board, but I will have to double check that. So for example, if you take out student loans like I did in undergrad, and you're currently enrolled in graduate program, your payments and interests get deferred. So that's one really important thing to sort of bear in mind, because part of this question is about sort of how one manages that cost alongside grad fund or sort of living through grad school as well, right? In terms of the humanities, the conventional wisdom, and I'm not going to say that I necessarily endorse this, but the conventional wisdom is that if you are admitted to a program that doesn't offer you at least TA support throughout the entire course of degree, it's not necessarily something that you want to get into, because you don't necessarily want to end up on the hook year 6 or 7 not being able to figure something out, and then having, you know, tens and tens of thousands of dollars of debt on hand, particularly if you're going to graduate with a humanities degree, which has a very sort of unstable career trajectory, at least historically that's been true. The other thing that I would just say, and I say this with some hesitation because I don't think this is a great practice and it's a distracting one, but I and many of my colleagues in humanities do teach often as lecturers. So there's a distinction between tenure track faculty, which are sort of the professors that we would normally think about, and a category called adjunct, which is composed of lecturers that aren't sort of really institutionally anchored into universities the same way, aren't really guaranteed tenure or anything like that. So it's often possible, particularly in California and places where there's a lot of PhD credentialed people floating around, to find these sort of temporary or at least what are intended to be temporary teaching posts. So for example, I teach a class at San Jose State, and that provides some extra income on top of my normal like sort of TA salary or what have you. So just a couple sort of notes to think about.
Wait, I have a question for Christian. So how do you balance, having this TA-ship here in one school and having employment at another school? How do you balance all that?
I'm going to give you a really unsatisfactory answer. It is just my planner. Like, it is straight. And I know this is like the worst thing. I hated hearing this. I still hate hearing this, but it really is like time management. At a certain point, like, yeah, at a certain point, it just becomes indispensable to figure that component out. And that looks different for everyone. Like, not everybody needs to like write things out. I found that that's like my way of wrapping my head around things. But everybody I know that's sort of had a satisfactory grad school experience has found something that works for them in terms of figuring out how to balance these things, because it is sort of jolting. Like, and the class that I teach at San Jose is only sort of tangentially related to my main research. So like, I don't know, this isn't, again, I preface this by saying this isn't a healthy practice necessarily, but I sort of compartmentalize it and think about it as like this fun thing that I do on the side. And it's almost like a break for me. My language classes also feel that same way for me. But yeah, the hard sort of truth of it is that it does come down to just figuring out a system that works for you to make all these elements work. Because even if you're doing the conventional path, which is, still managing a TA-ship, managing your classes, producing a dissertation, like, it's still a lot. Like, it just, at a certain point, it has to, you got to figure out what works for you and sort of go from that. And that can look all sorts of different ways.
Thank you.
Alberto, Adrian, do you guys want to answer this question?
Nothing really to add. Some people get into PhDs and then drop after they get the master's, because PhDs usually offer funding. And I personally would suggest to not get into debt for it, but that's my personal suggestion. I heard people doing it, but otherwise it's tough. So be ready for it. Make sure that at least to an extent is what you want to do. So you're pretty sure when you go into it, because you need to do sacrifices. I work in a restaurant, and now I always take up like a second job on top of my TA-ship just to kind of have enough money, even to get through the summer, because here at UCS, you don't have summer funding guaranteed, right? So you have like a 2-month gap, or 3-month gap even, as far as pay. So you have to be dedicated, you have to be good time management person, as Christian has said. But it's also rewarding. So I'm happy with my decision personally, but you have to make sure that you're ready to make some sacrifices.
Yeah. Adrian, if you're going to say out, then I'll go on to the next question.
Yeah, it's typical in STEM. Well, engineering is kind of different sometimes. Sometimes engineering programs, especially master's programs, won't be funded. You have to pay for it. And so it's just deciding, like, do I need to get this degree to reach my professional goals? However, in some of the fields where you do need a master's degree to reach those goals, sometimes the company you work for will pay for that. So sometimes you'll get hired after your bachelor's degree, in a company that then wants you to go and get a master's degree. And sometimes the company will sponsor your master's degree. So it kind of really differs. But for, I believe, most PhDs in STEM, those are funded. If you get accepted into a PhD program and they are not giving you a funding package and they're expecting you to pay for it, they're not committing to you. So maybe that's not true of some fields in STEM, but I do believe that it's the truth in most STEM fields. So getting the PhD is deferring those student loans that you might have from undergrad, but you shouldn't be getting more loans.
Thank you. So the next question we're going to ask is, what are your thoughts on gap years, or your sort of taking a break between your undergrad and eventual grad school education?
I'm ready to jump into this one. From my personal experience, I recommend taking a gap year. My senior year of undergrad was one of the most stressful experiences of my entire life. Finishing my senior thesis, taking all of these upper level classes, applying to programs, applying to, grants, and it's just a lot to be doing. And there's not really a detriment for taking a year. It gives you time to, breathe. It gives you time to focus on your grad school applications. It gives you time to build relationships with, your prospective advisors. So there's not really a lot of downsides to taking a year, and there are a lot of pluses to it. And I got here and I was kind of a little burnt out from having done my senior year, gone into a summer internship, and then immediately come here and starting my program. Like, I didn't even have 2 weeks off. So I think that it's really important to take some time for yourself in all of this. And I think a gap year is very helpful for that.
If I may, again, this is based on my personal experience. I took at least 1 year off between each of my degrees. So after high school, I didn't do it for a year. After college, a year. After my first master, a year. And I think I wouldn't be doing a PhD if it wasn't for these gaps. Again, this is my, I was gonna say, as lucky as Annika to have a dream as I was 12. I wanted to be a basketball player, so that's what I did. But having time off really made me actually miss academia and school. And I'd be like, I miss that. I want to get back to it. I want to focus on this project that I developed in the past and I kind of dropped. So again, everyone has a different path, and some people thrive to go, through it and be done early and kind of enter a career. Of course, now I'm a bit older than the average, but I'm happy what I'm doing. So there's nothing wrong in taking a year off. There's also nothing wrong going directly, but just know that if you're meant to go to grad school, you'll end up there. If that's kind of what you're passionate about, and you keep maintaining the network and kind of developing a good application. So I personally would recommend it, but at the same time, if you know what you want to do, go for it.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. Having taken gap years myself, I personally found it really beneficial to do something that was wildly different from any sort of trajectory that I had been thinking about, and helped me to sort of really figure out what I wanted to do. It sounds corny, but it was very much a sort of like way that I kind of figured out what I actually wanted to go for. The thing I would sort of add to this is that I think it's important to say that it makes you a different type of candidate. So the conventional wisdom around like taking gap years is, oh, you'll lose momentum, you know, maybe you don't end up applying again or what have you, right? And like Alberto was saying, I think that if you're sort of meant to be in grad school, you'll end up there one way or the other. That is sort of jives with my experience and the experience of other people that I know. And it also sort of shapes how admitting departments sort of look at you, not in a bad way. It used to, the conventional use of wisdom used to be that it was a bad thing if somebody had a gap year on their record. It's just not sort of the case in my experience. Oftentimes admissions committees look at candidates with gap years, and particularly if there is sort of just like out doing something in the quote unquote real world, which is a phrasing that academics tend to use a lot. But you know, as somebody who's possibly going to be very well-rounded and actually have sort of really sort of chosen and have a dedication to what they're doing rather than sort of just going in. I'm not saying that that is true about people who go straight from undergrad to grad programs, not at all necessarily, but it does sort of shape how admissions committees view you. And so sort of talking about that when you do apply might be something that's useful. I found it useful, but.
Yeah. Oh no, Annika, you can go, please.
Oh, I was just gonna say I definitely agree with Christian in that gap years are actually like encouraged, and if you have the experience in undergrad and you have all this research experience or work experience, life experience, then you will be a competitive applicant just coming out of undergrad. I personally chose to apply because I saw there was an opportunity there, and if I didn't get in, I would take a gap year. I would be fine with that. But I think it's okay to go straight out of undergrad, and you don't necessarily have to do a master's right before doing a PhD or a PsyD or anything you want to do, you know. I actually talked to an admissions director at a school I was applying to right when I started the whole process of applying, and he said, we actually encourage people to come right out of undergrad. You don't necessarily have to do a master's. It's kind of a myth that you have to do a master's and then you go to a PhD, you know, you can apply right after your undergrad like Adrian did. So definitely reach out to the schools that you're looking at. Personally, I went on LinkedIn and I connected with over 40 people in this like span of 4 months who have gone to different grad programs. And I said, what's your advice for me? I'm applying to schools. And I connected with people, and you know, that's what I was talking about, is that you have to have a voice and you have to like show that dedication and that effort if you want to do it. And there are systems of support for you. And yeah, I think if you want to do it, you're going to do it, you know?
Yeah. I have, I want to say something quickly, sort of, there's some sort of kind of tangential experience. My mom runs a grad school program. And so something she's always told me, because I eventually want to apply to grad school, is she actually looks for candidates, not particularly who are always have taken a gap year or years, but have gotten experience more than anything else. And so whether that comes directly after your undergrad or not, that's something I've been personally told. So I figured I would just mention that. And so my final question for you in this section will be, is there anything you wish you had known before applying or starting grad school?
I wish I had had better time management skills, I guess. I mean, like, I think I had good time management skills. It's just like, there's so much to grad school, and it's different than undergrad, where you constantly have deadlines, assignment deadlines, or, midterms week is coming or finals week. Like there's always deadlines put in front of you. And with grad school, a lot more of that is self-managed and you have to make your own deadlines. So I guess I just wish that I was better prepared for that. I didn't have like a time management planner system that I was already super good at using. And instead I've like kind of fumbled my way into something that works for me now. But if I had had that at the beginning, oh boy, would have gotten so much done.
Does anyone else have anything they want to add, or should we just move on to the next question? Cool, then I'm going to pass it off to Leilani then for our next section.
Okay, so our next section is going to be about your actual experience in grad life as opposed to like the application process and, advice for when you're still applying. So sorry, Annika, I don't know how much input you're going to be able to give on these questions, but yeah, so our first question is, what has your experience been like so far, while also noting your best and worst aspects of your experience? So yeah, I'll give you a little bit of time to think about it. But Adrian, would you like to go first? And then we'll pass it off to Christian and Alberto, if that's cool.
Sure. I think my experience has been really positive. I'm very happy with my grad school experience. I, chose an advisor that I thought I would get along well with, and I was right about that. And, I've been very, very involved in student leadership. I am a representative on a ton of committees, and like I was co-president of the GSA a couple of years ago, and like those are all things that are really important to me that my advisor supports as professional development opportunities. At the same time, even though those things are really important to me, they do take a lot of your time and your bandwidth. So I'd say like some of the stress that doing a ton of extracurriculars can add is probably like one of the worst things, I guess, of my experience, is like being co-president of the GSA added like 15, 20 hours of work a week. So I'd say that was a pretty stressful time. But overall, like I'm really happy with what I'm doing here, and I'm having a really good experience.
Yeah, I've also had what I think is a really fantastic experience in grad school. For me, the best part has been really getting to actually sort of focus on an academic project, getting to sort of know all sorts of different people who are engaged in any sort of variety of different work, and really having time to sort of think for a living, which is pretty cool, and is something that I don't take for granted at all. In terms of worst experiences, I won't call this a bad experience because I think it's one that was much more of a learning experience in terms of getting a sense of how the academy works. But I came into a department that was somewhat in shambles when I arrived. There were a lot of sort of issues going on amongst the faculty. I'm sure some of you might be familiar with that. So I came in right when a lot of huge drama was sort of and big problems are sort of unfolding in history of consciousness. And so it wasn't a bad experience in the sense that I'm in many ways glad it happened, because I got a sort of very intimate look at how particular sort of sets of privileges are protected in the university, oftentimes at the expense of, or oftentimes in ways that they may not, or they probably shouldn't be, frankly. But yeah, so it was definitely sort of coming into an environment that I didn't have a great grasp on that I didn't really have a full sort of understanding of. And it was difficult to sort of figure all that out while I'm also trying to sort of like do grad student things. So.
Yeah, I would echo Adrian and Christian. Overall great experience. I feel like as long as you know what you're getting into at the beginning, I'm happy with it, and I'm also lucky to have like a partner to share a rent with, right? That makes life definitely easier. And actually connected to that, as far as like the worst aspect, I think like the COLA campaign, among other, have kind of unveiled the fact that academia is this special place, this special community that Adrian is, discussing in the chat, but it's also a business, right? And so maybe one thing that I came into, I thought it was almost like this, this like paradise, but this kind of special place that is unsullied by real world problems, right? But it's not the case. So it is important to know that going in, and there are, academia is made by people, and people have their own interests and their plans and stuff like that. So I'm very happy in it because, again, I get paid to do what I like. So I'm happy with that. And I get the opportunity of meeting great people, having events, meeting you guys as well. Like, this is very fulfilling, but at the same time, it remains a business. You guys are paying incredible amounts of tuitions, and there are dynamics of promotion and who gets the funding and all that kind of stuff. So this is not much different than other industries. So it's kind of like not necessarily a wake-up call, but something that I didn't think about coming in, and now after 3 years, I'm more aware of. So not necessarily be aware it's a trap. It's more like, it's one aspect that you need to keep in mind.
Great. Thanks for all your guys' input. Okay, so the next question I have is kind of similar to the first one, so it's probably just like a follow-up question, but what does a day in the life of being a grad student look like? So what is more of your like day-to-day experience like? We can go in the same order, or if Christian or Alberto are burning to go first, you guys can jump in as well.
I'd say that a surprising amount of my day goes to answering emails. I didn't expect email management to be so important. Reading research articles, thinking about your research. I am about to have a bunch of samples sent to me, and so right now I'm like doing a lot of back and forth with my advisor, trying to get all of our details in line, and like I didn't really think before about how I would have to get like permits and importing documents and stuff like that. So there are some surprising aspects of being a graduate student, but I think overall a lot of it is reading. If you're TAing, then you have a lot of grading to do. Day to day, not that exciting, I don't think.
I can go next. Well, again, I consider myself lucky because I'm very good at time management. One thing I can say is like, be ready to use some of your weekends to catch up with work and stuff like that. But personally, I work roughly 6 to 8 hours a day, so regular hours, and then sometimes I do a Saturday, and I'm able to, work out, go for walks, do my own thing, cook, work, I have like a regular life, but I consider myself lucky, and I know other people have different, social and personal dynamics, right, to be considered. But, it's great. Sometimes you have to do the things that you don't want, and that's part of the game. And sometimes, you get lost in your research project, and then you keep your eyes out of the screen, and it's been 5 hours and 10 pages, right? So I think you should be ready to do ups and downs, I think, like everything else. But again, if you're happy doing, not everyone gets to get paid to do what they like. And for me, it makes, life easier for sure.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think my sort of orientation looks a lot like what was just laid out there. The only sort of thing I really have to add here is that the day in the life question is sort of about, for me, switching gears a lot. Oftentimes I'm sort of moving from being, from reading on my own to being in a meeting to TAing or teaching to being in a class and then to like working on a dissertation or something. So like there's a lot of just sort of compartmentalization that kind of happens, and figuring out how to sort of shift gears into those different roles is really sort of definitive, I think, of just about any day in my life. So
Nice. I think, okay. So next question, you guys kind of touched on this a little bit in the chat about like classes and stuff. So one question that we had was, what does kind of like the curriculum look like for grad school? I know that's kind of very much more oriented towards like undergrad, but like what would you say in terms of like, you know, having to balance classes, which you said was kind of like a smaller portion of your experience, but with also like your research, like how does that look like in terms of like a curriculum type of layout?
I think this entirely depends on what kind of program you're going into. And even within a program, it depends on what department. So, the Earth Science department here at Santa Cruz has fairly minimal required classes. And then, your optional classes are mostly determined on what would be helpful for you in doing the research that you plan on doing. But, I don't know, maybe the Earth Science program at LA requires you to take 6 classes. I don't know, I'm just making that up. But each department and each program is likely going to have different requirements. So when you're looking at programs and you're trying to decide between them, if they have a graduate handbook or if they have this information spelled out on their website, that's maybe something that you want to consider. Like, I personally like taking classes. They help keep me in like a fresh mindset. So I've been lucky that I've been able to take more classes than typically the average geology student would. But if that's not something that you want to do, maybe you want to consider a graduate program that's not going to require a lot of classes.
yeah, it's always possible to find grad student handbooks on departmental websites, or usually possible, and I would definitely recommend that you do that. In the humanities, the conventional way that this happens is that for a period of time, usually around 3 years, you're doing a combination of coursework and teaching, and then you become ABD, all but dissertation. You sort of pass this sort of mid program exam and move into just writing your dissertation, where in theory you're not necessarily taking coursework anymore. That line gets blurry. So like I'm just working on my dissertation in theory now, but I'm still doing like language coursework and stuff just because my project requires it. But I think the sort of conventional way that this breaks down in humanities programs is that get ready to read like a lot, hundreds and hundreds of pages, more than you ever would have sort of thought you would be capable of, but you figure out ways to do it anyway. And most courses sort of center on some theme or particular sort of problem or what have you, and then you do a lot of reading and produce sort of a term paper at the end of it. That's kind of the general way that it works here. Those can be around like 20 pages long, and that's pretty typical, I think, across grad programs at different institutions, at least that I'm familiar with, in the 20 to 30 page range. So yeah, it's and again, sometimes it's very strictly sort of dictated by programmatic requirements. For example, a lot of the history programs I was looking at had pretty well-defined like courses that I would take. HistCon had 2. So, and then I was just like, it's kind of largely up to you after that to figure out whatever works for your project. So definitely just do the work of investigating what a given program would sort of ask of you if you're going into that world.
Yes, I would say similar for us. Usually first 2 or 3 years, take classes while doing everything else. And then you should be able to kind of like leave that behind and focus on your research work.
Okay. Great. Thanks for your input. Yeah, so that's the last of that section. And we'll move on to the next, which Saloni will take care of. But yeah.
Thank you, Lonnie. So for our last section to wrap up, we wanted to kind of address some questions of like post-grad school and connecting all of the previous sections. So the first question, and Annika, I think you'll be able to jump back into this one too. What were your initial goals when deciding to continue with your higher education? Were you planning on becoming a professor, or is there a specific profession you were looking to get into with the degree that you're getting?
I can go. Well, as far as advanced degree, I'm still in it. After my first master's, I did get a job, and my master's helped me. Same with my partner. We did the same master's, and she got a job, surprisingly doing what the master prepared her for. And as far as like PhD grad school is, yes, because I would like to be working either, in academia as a teacher or as a researcher. So, if you want to be in a university, that's usually the path you gotta take. So, as I mentioned during my gaps, I figured out that that's the kind of the lifestyle I want to, as Christian has mentioned, it's not because I want to be a millionaire, but because I like kind of the pace of academia, the fact that more or less you're on your own schedule as long as you manage the time well. Summers are kind of up to you if you take the tenure track opportunity. If you're a lecturer, it's a whole other bag of worms. But yeah, so given that was kind of my hopeful career, I decided to pursue a PhD in the social sciences. So yeah, I think for social sciences and humanities, as Christian says, might be a little different, but.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with everything that was just said. In terms of like the goals that I sort of particularly decided on, like I said earlier, when I left undergrad, I really was unsure that I wanted to do, or unsure about what I wanted to do generally. And when I decided to do my master's, and this is just something because many folks are interested in teaching careers of various sorts. One thing that's sort of often overlooked is if you want to teach at the secondary level, just like in schools, so junior high and up, oftentimes those will require a master's, particularly in California. It makes it easier. And as well as a teaching credential. So those are also just things to keep in mind if teaching, but like if teaching's in your mind, but you don't know if you want to deal with all the trappings of universities. Once I sort of got into that program, I got really into the research side of things. And that's basically why I decided to go to, or to start applying to PhD programs. I just really sort of fell in love with the sort of working on an intellectual project over a long period of time and what that feels like and what it can sort of do out there in the world. And in terms of job opportunities, yeah, Alberto, I think, did a great job of laying out sort of what the teaching side of things looks like for PhDs including in the humanities. One thing that I would add, and I sort of hinted at earlier, was that there's been a pretty concerted effort to think a little bit more robustly about what post-PhD trajectories can look like for people rather than having the professoriate serve as a default. So the public humanities and the sort of public facing social sciences has been something that I've personally got really interested in. When I go out onto the job market, which is terrifyingly only like a year away, if that. I'll be applying for both sort of classic jobs in academia, as well as things like working with different research institutes and doing all sorts of different sort of public programming that involve the humanities. So there's many different ways to sort of think about the doors that are, especially nowadays, starting to open up a little more widely for people with PhDs in the humanities.
You can go, Adrian.
Okay. I find mentorship and working with students really fulfilling. I'm a first generation student as well. I've got my little button on, from, you know, rural North Dakota. My parents didn't even graduate high school. And like, I landed myself in a big university and was just like kind of lost, didn't know what was going on or who I was or what I wanted. And like, I really benefited from, you know, professors and mentors, and I just want to be that kind of person for other people as well. I was a resident assistant in my undergrad, which was very fulfilling for me. And coming through my PhD, the opportunities that I've had to work with students themselves, you know, TAing or mentoring undergraduate research has been some of the most fulfilling things that I've been able to do. And so I've just come to this realization that that's what I want to keep doing. And so I am looking at, you know, continuing in academia, but probably more in like the community college landscape where I can work more individually with students, and like research is an option and it's an opportunity, but it's not like the focus. And if you're in, you know, one of these big R1 universities, then, you know, professors are more focused on research than, you know, sometimes on teaching or mentorship. And I kind of want it to be the other way. So I think I'm going to be looking at, you know, community college positions or like liberal arts colleges, because that's where the balance gets kind of shifted a little bit. But there are, you know, graduate students in my cohort that are looking outside of academia, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, getting a PhD or getting a master's degree can open a lot of doors. And I think you have to look a lot at transferable skills. So, you know, getting a master's or a PhD in geology doesn't mean that you can only be a geologist. Like a lot of my peers are, you know, looking at positions in the tech sector doing data analysis, and they're perfectly skilled for that kind of a job. So, you know, I think that there's a lot of opportunities. I just personally want to continue with the working with students and mentorship type stuff.
Yeah, I want to do a lot of different things, like I said before, after I graduate from the graduate program. And I just like doing a lot. Like, I'm a very busy human being, but I also balance my life, I feel like, because I balance self-care. And I think that it's really important, at least in the psychology field, if you want to work in the mental health field, you need to do more than a bachelor's degree. At least that's what I've found. In order to work with patients, you have to have some higher degree. But that means that you're going to have a lot of job opportunities once you graduate from that graduate program. Like Adrian was saying, you have way more doors that are open and a lot more opportunities. And actually in the program, for PsyD programs, you do a practicum and you do an internship during the program. So most of the second, third, and fourth year is spent with clinical practical experience. And those can lead to job opportunities right away. You know, they'll say, hey, you did a great job in this internship, let's hire you. So you're set up for a job already, and that's already hands-on experience right there. And you can say no to opportunities as well. You know, you don't have to say yes to everything that comes to you. If you get into a grad program and you really don't want to go, you can say no. You know, you are special in yourself, you are qualified. And if you're not feeling it, don't feel pressured to go. You know, it's a commitment, it's an investment, but it's an investment in yourself. And you are valuable as a student. I know undergrads aren't typically seen as valuable right away, but they are, and we are. And I like putting that out there because I often thought that I wasn't valuable because I'm young. But, you know, if I have this passion in me and I know I want to go places, and I think it's to my benefit. So thank you. Yeah, that's my point.
Thank you so much to all of you. You guys are fantastic, and you like covered the other questions in this section as well, like what kinds of job opportunities might be available afterwards and how are you navigating choosing that pathway and what factors in. So with that, I think we would like to begin closing out the event, if that's okay with everyone. All right. If we want to stop the recording so we can